Hello, thank you all for standing by. My name is Brent Songen from the Department of Agricultural, Environmental, and Development Economics at Ohio State University. On behalf of my colleagues here at Ohio State University and at the Ohio State University Climate Change Outreach Team, let me welcome you to today's installment of our monthly webinar series. We're delighted you're with us for the presentation by Timothy Considine from the University of Wyoming titled Balancing the Economic Benefits with the Environmental Impacts of Shale Energy Development. These webinars are an initiative of the Ohio State University Climate Change Outreach Team, a multi-departmental effort within the university led by Ohio State University Extension, Ohio Sea Grant, Bird Polar Research Center, and a number of other departments at Ohio State. Before introducing our speaker, let me just note a few logistical issues about today's webinar. During the entire webinar, all participants will be in a listen-only mode. We do encourage you to ask questions via the chat feature located on the right hand of your screen. Simply type your question and send it to the entire group, or you can send it just to me. Send your questions at any time during the presentation. I'll collect them and then ask them of Tim during the question and answer session that we'll have at the end. We do have more than 300 participants on this webinar. It's a great, big, diverse group representing governmental agencies, academia, nonprofit groups from around the country, and a number of others. Please keep those questions coming throughout the presentation, and we'll make sure that your questions get asked at some point there at the end. This webinar is being recorded and will be posted onto our website for later viewing. Also, we will post a webinar survey in the chat feature toward the end of the hour. This is really important. We hope you take the time to answer the questions on that survey. Please do take a few minutes to do that at the end. It'll really help us continue to bring better webinars in the future. So without further ado, let me introduce today's speaker. Dr. Timothy Considine is the School of Energy Resources Professor of Energy Economics at the University of Wyoming and Director of the Center for Energy Economics and Public Policy there. He was previously employed with the Pennsylvania State University, Bank of America, and the Congressional Budget Office. Dr. Considine holds a PhD from Cornell University, an MS from Purdue, and a BA from Loyola University of Chicago. We're delighted to have Dr. Considine with us today to speak about balancing the economic benefits and the environmental impacts of shale energy development. Dr. Considine?
Good morning, all, or good afternoon, all. I'll just start with slide 2, an outline of my talk. I've got 7 sections to cover. The first looks at the nature of shale energy production, and also looking at some aggregate data on the importance of shale energy for our nation's energy mix. Then I'll go into an overview of the shale energy supply chain, and the objective here is to give people an idea of the economic impacts and also the environmental impacts. And then in the third section, I'll quantify some of these economic impacts. And in section 4, I'll look at some data from around the country that seems to suggest that there are some measurable economic impacts from shale energy development. And then in the next 2 sections, I'll look at the environmental impacts of shale energy development and then attempt to weigh the costs with the benefits, mainly directed to the question, is shale energy development worthwhile? Are the environmental impacts manageable in light of the economic impacts? So let's take a look at the nature of shale energy production. On slide 4, a couple of definitions here are important, and this is important for understanding why developing oil and gas from shale formations is different than conventional oil and gas fields. Conventional oil and gas fields develop oil and gas that resides in porous formations, and the oil and gas is literally pushed out of the ground by underground forces, either from gas or water. So they're pressurized porous formations. Unconventional oil and natural gas production come from so-called tight formations, either tight sands or shale, and many believe that these shale deposits are the source rock of oil and gas for the porous formations. Generally, they lie well below these porous formations. Geologists and engineers have been aware of these shale deposits for many decades, but the technology wasn't available to profitably extract the oil and gas from these formations. So technology is the key here, and there have been a number of technological improvements over the past 10, 15 years that have really gained a foothold since 2004. And there are basically two: horizontal drilling and hydraulic fracturing. On the next slide is an illustration of what these technologies can do. You can see there are two wells. The one on the left is a vertical well, as the diagram illustrates. And on the right is a horizontal well. And horizontal drilling was a big advance because the lateral section, or the horizontal segment, can go through the center of the formation, exposing more resource-bearing rock to the well bore. The fissures that are emanating either from a vertical well or horizontal well are the fractures that are first opened up through explosions in the well bore, and then opened up further with an injection of water under pressure, and that's the hydraulic fracturing. So both vertical wells and horizontal wells can be fractured, and this increases the permeability of the reservoir and greatly enhances the production of oil and natural gas. On the next slide, here we have an illustration of, this is data from some of our surveys, of the Pennsylvania Marcellus drilling and production. And you can see we have a time period of 2009 and 2010 quarterly data. And you can see that the green bars are wells drilled to total depth, and there's a dramatic increase in the number of wells drilled per quarter, and with it a very sharp increase in natural gas production. And this is characteristic of many shale plays. During the early development phase, a lot of companies are drilling to cover their leases. In other words, there's a fixed period of time where companies need to drill or they lose the lease. And so there's a very intensive period of drilling. And production for these shale wells comes on very quickly. And you can see here, Pennsylvania essentially became a net exporter of gas in late 2010. The industry is getting much more efficient in reducing the time to complete wells, and also production in the Pennsylvania Marcellus in particular is coming in much stronger than anticipated due to multi-stage fracking and other innovations. Now, on the next slide, slide 7, is the production decline curve. And this explains why drilling in some of these shale plays is so intensive, because of the very steep production decline curve. You can see two curves on the right. On the horizontal axis is output measured in million cubic feet per year, and on the horizontal axis is the years after initial production. There's a widespread expectation that many of these shale wells will produce over a long period of time, but we have only about 10, 15 years of experience with this. Many are still producing. And you can see that on the green line, if you add up the area under that curve, it equals 2.8 billion cubic feet. That's an estimate of the reserves that are available to be produced from that well. And you can see the numbers on the left that kind of give you an idea of how rapidly production declines in the initial year, from the initial year. And then the blue line is another production decline curve for a well that has more gas in it. And what we found over the past couple of years in Pennsylvania in particular is that these curves have been shifting out as the industry has been becoming more proficient at multi-stage fracking and other techniques for improving the productivity of the well. Nevertheless, to keep increasing output, you need to keep drilling. And I've coined this the treadmill effect. So if a company or an industry slows down or reduces drilling, then those production decline curves will eventually catch up with you. Production will peak and start to decline. We're already seeing early evidence of this in the Barnett with the slowdown in drilling there. Okay. Now, on slide 8, just kind of give you an idea of why there's such powerful incentives to drill these wells. I ran some numbers on the net present value and internal rate of return on a variety of Marcellus shale wells for various amounts of reserves. And you can see here I ran these numbers for reserves of 2 BCF, 3 BCF, and 4.6 BCF per well. For instance, in northeastern Pennsylvania, there are quite a few wells in that 4.6 BCF range and above. And as you move west and south, the wells get a bit smaller and the reserves aren't quite as large. I assumed 4% of the output is natural gas liquids. That's a critical assumption. That's based on some aggregate data we've collected. And I ran these numbers under pretty conservative assumptions for the Henry Hub price, which is down this year. And you can see the ramp up in future years, assumed an operating cost of $1 per MCF. And even with these assumptions, the internal rates of return vary from 3.7 to 8% over the life of the well. These rates of return were much higher a couple of years ago when gas prices were in the $4 to $5 range. But even now, there's still a pretty strong incentive to drill, especially for the liquids, for the wells that have a higher proportion of liquids output. On page 9 is a overview of shale gas production in the United States for the past 4 years, well, from 2007 to 2010. And you can see the leading shale producer is, those numbers reported on the table are for the Texas Barnett field. And you can see that output, I forgot to put the units here. These are million cubic feet. So output in the Texas Barnett was 1.8 trillion cubic feet in 2010. And the share, share of U.S. dry gas production went from about 6.8% in 2007 to nearly 20% in 2010. I would guess that it's probably well over 20% in 2011 going into 2012. The next slide is another dimension of this shale revolution in the oil and gas sector, and that is rising U.S. liquids production. A couple of years ago, a number of companies saw that it was much more profitable to produce oil and liquids using horizontal drilling and hydraulic fracturing. And as a result, U.S. crude oil production has been increasing, as the chart illustrates. From 2008, crude production is up over 600,000 barrels per day. Much of this is coming from the Bakken play in North Dakota, and in Texas, the Eagle Ford Shale and the Permian Basin. And also the blue bars is another important source for liquids in the petroleum complex, and that's natural gas liquids and liquid refinery gases. And you can see that output is up almost 400,000 barrels. So just in the past 4 years, U.S. liquids production is up about 1 million barrels per day, which is pretty significant over a short period of time. The next slide illustrates how this increasing liquids production has improved our trade balance on oil. Oil imports are down almost 2 million barrels per day from 2008 levels, and about half of that is slightly more than half is accounted for by additional U.S. liquids production, and the other half is due to a reduction in demand for oil. Okay, so that's the big picture. Let's take a look, a quick run through the shale energy supply chain, and this applies both to oil and gas. And liquids is going to be a pretty important part of the story in developing Appalachian shale resources going forward, because there's a lot of interest in western Pennsylvania and eastern Ohio in the liquids portion of the Marcellus and the Utica shale. Okay, now as development occurs, the first stage is leasing activity, and this cartoon that's pictured on the slide is whales. This is from 1861 issue of Vanity Fair, where whales are toasting the advent of rock oil, and the leasing activity occurs as companies try to gain access to land. So you will see, and we've seen this in Pennsylvania and other regions, and I think it has occurred over the past few years in Ohio, where you have landmen moving in who are hiring lawyers and real estate brokers and other assistants to write mineral leases and get the leasing activity underway. The next stage is exploration activities, where you have seismic crews come in to survey the land to determine where the oil and gas is located, and you get some business activity in this stage. And then where the real physical activity occurs is in site preparation in the third stage, and here you're clearing land and building roads. And as the illustration depicts, there are visible, unavoidable economic impacts. Land is cleared, roads are put in. Note the large amount of aggregates used per well. This is stone and gravel, and you can see the list of companies that are used to provide these services and prepare the site. Next is well construction, and the term in the industry is when a well is spudded. That's when the drill bit hits the ground, and most statistical agencies will then measure, okay, a well is started. This drilling can take anywhere from 2 to 4 weeks, and you can see the list of companies involved. One sector that sees a lot of business is, again, not only aggregates, but concrete producers. About 125 tons of concrete are used per well. And And then next is once the well is drilled, most wells are stimulated, and this is where hydraulic fracturing comes in. Notice in the picture there are a number of long vehicles. These are flatbed trailers that have diesel pumps on them, and a very significant amount of diesel fuel is consumed to run these pumps to pump the water into the ground for the hydraulic fracturing. Estimates vary. Anywhere from 5 to 8 million gallons of water are used to frack a well, and a considerable amount of sand and other materials are used during the fracturing process. Then next is the completion of the well site after drilling. And here for most, here on the right is pictured 2 wells. On the top is a typical well that doesn't produce a lot of liquids, and you notice that the footprint is very small. There's a small tank on the right to collect liquids, and then on the bottom is another site where there are more liquids involved. Then finally, okay, so that completes the drilling process, but there's something called midstream development that occurs, and this is, and it varies by region and counties. Companies will try to set up an area like a good portion of a county or an entire county, and they may have hundreds of wells, and they're all connected in a network of gathering lines, and those gathering lines go to compressor stations. And those compressor stations raise the pressure of the gas so it can be pushed into interstate pipelines. So there's a great deal of investment that occurs in building out these gathering line networks and compressor stations. And then pictured down below is a medium-sized pipeline that may connect these compressor stations to the big interstate pipelines. So you can see that these type of facilities have a lot of pumps, steel, and this is why a lot of people have expect that this development will be a big stimulus to the manufacturing sector. Now, another key step, and this is real important for the emergence of the Utica in Ohio and the western Marcellus, that region has a lot of, the Marcellus and the Utica have a lot of wet gas production there. And what is wet gas? Well, wet gas comes out with not only methane, but propane, butane, and ethane, and these latter 3 products can be extracted in a natural gas processing facility that's pictured on the right, and then sold as petrochemical feedstocks. So in southwestern Pennsylvania, a number of these facilities have been built to process this Marcellus gas and provide these products to refineries and petrochemical facilities. And then finally, and we've yet to see this in a big way, although it's starting in some areas, is the expansion of downstream industries that are based on natural gas. And there's a number of possible sectors. First of all, as I alluded to before, petrochemical manufacturing. Ethane is a feedstock for ethylene production, and ethylene production is used to make plastic materials, feedstocks for plastic materials. Another potential a very attractive industry that is a fertilizer production, anhydrous ammonia production, requires natural gas as a feedstock, and currently U.S. gas prices are quite low by world standards. The only lower gas price area is in the Middle East, and this makes it very attractive to relocate fertilizer production back in the United States. There's also metals such as steel and glass industries that use heat for melting materials, and they would also benefit and perhaps expand production. There's been one announcement recently of a steel mill going into eastern Ohio to produce pipe for the drilling industry. Another big potential user of this natural gas is electric power generation, and here you could see quite a bit of switching from coal to natural gas. And then finally, another application is compressed natural gas, CNG, in transportation. And it's likely that these applications would occur in high mileage, low fuel economy vehicles like sanitary trucks, city buses, truck fleets, and the like. And then one other sector that is that could be a market for this eastern gas is exports of natural gas in the form of liquefied natural gas. And this, there are a number of groups that are have efforts underway to export LNG out of the Gulf Coast. The point is, all of these downstream industries will take a while to take root and develop, several years. Okay, let's take a quick look at some of the economic impacts. We have, when I was just about finishing my time at Penn State, I was invited to do an economic impact of the Pennsylvania Marcellus, and we did that study. It was released in 2009. We've done a couple of others since then. We're currently involved in another study. And here we conduct surveys of spending by the industry and do a conventional economic impact analysis. On slide 24, we have an overview of spending. These numbers are based on a survey of companies operating in the Pennsylvania Marcellus, and you can see total spending rising from $3.2 billion in 2008 to $11.5 billion in 2010. And you can see the breakdown. Lease and bonus payments are significant. They're starting to drop off now as the play is developed. Upstream drilling and completion rose sharply over the 3-year period, as well as midstream processing. Royalties, you can see, are also increasing as these wells are brought on and start producing. On the next slide is a diagram of the composition of the first round of the spending, and what we did in our initial survey. We're going to be updating this year. We got accounting records from the companies, and we classified, we identified, we got names and addresses for the suppliers, and we assigned industrial codes to each so it would align with the input-output model. The takeaway on this slide is the wide diversity of industries in which natural gas drilling companies acquire supplies. The construction industry is a big supplier of goods and services. Obviously, oil and gas support is important, wholesale trade, transportation, oil and gas drilling, and the like. The next slide is these are estimates based on an input-output analysis of the direct, indirect, and induced impacts of this drilling, the spending on drilling and midstream development, on employment and value added. And for instance, in 2010, we estimated that $11 billion of spending supported, if you will, about 140,000 jobs in a variety of different sectors, and the value-added numbers fall in the line as well. Here on the next slide, on slide 27, is a summary of the economic impacts for 2010 on a per well basis. So for instance, just the direct impacts, and this is just the direct spending, you've got about $3.8 million per well, about 48 jobs per well. And some have argued that the rise of the gas industry will displace other industries such as coal, and that's a legitimate issue that requires further analysis. A lot of eastern coal is being exported now, but I think it's important to take a look at how new industries will be created with the additional production of this natural gas. So in particular, the industrial use of natural gas in the chemical industry, and also the possibility of LNG exports. But again, these industries will take a while to develop. Our economic impact analysis to date have not included these downstream effects. Another downstream effect that may be important to consider, and we made a preliminary estimate of this in our last economic impact analysis, was the effect that lower natural gas prices have on the economy in general. And we calculated in 2010 that the additional Marcellus production reduced natural gas prices by about 12% in 2010. I think those numbers are going to be considerably larger in 2011. And this operates like a big tax cut for households and businesses in lowering their bills for natural gas and electricity. And then layer on that would be the future stimulus from new industrial capacity. Okay, now most of these economic impact numbers or estimates are model driven, and we've always been concerned about seeing if the evidence really tends to support this story, and the next section puts some slides forth that seems to suggest that in the states with significant shale development, for instance on slide 30, unemployment rates are a bit lower, in some cases much lower, as in the case of North Dakota, but a bit lower than the national average. And this seems to be borne out by taking a closer look within the state. And this next slide on page 31 looks at unemployment rate differences from the state average in Pennsylvania for 6 counties. And you can see, and these are the big shale counties. Greene and Washington County are in southwestern Pennsylvania, and the other 4 are up in northeastern Pennsylvania. And you can see the shift, and it's clear that there is higher economic activity in these counties. This is another manifestation of this, the dots indicating where the wells are drilled, and the color coding indicating the deviations from the statewide average. The greener shades are for unemployment rates that are below the statewide average, and this again supports the story that there is some stimulus. Another indicator is sales tax revenue, and the map on page 3 also suggests that those counties that see considerable shale development see higher sales tax revenues, and this would be consistent with higher economic activity. So one can certainly legitimately argue about the magnitude, but the general direction is positive in terms of jobs and value added and tax revenues. The key question then are, what are the environmental impacts and how severe are they? So let's turn to that. And I did a study for the Manhattan Institute last year. It's on their website. The cover is pictured on page 35. You can go and look at the details. On this slide, I make 3 observations about the environmental impacts. First, there are unavoidable impacts during drilling. As I alluded to before, the clearing of land for well pads and pipelines. There's also local congestion, noise, dust in rural communities. And there are also emissions during drilling. And a lot of these emissions are associated with the hydraulic fracturing, the consumption of diesel fuel. And then another aspect are the environmental hazards. And these are much lower probability events. And the first hazard is stray gas due to failures in casing, and that results in contamination of water supplies. And containment pond breaches, when oil and gas is produced water and drilling muds are stored on site in ponds, and those ponds can break and leak into local streams. There's also spills from petroleum liquids handling, and also a lot of these are diesel spills. And then fourth, there are well blowouts and spills related to that. Risk is a very important element of this, and what we've tried to do in the Manhattan Report is look closely at the environmental violations and quantify exactly what is happening in this area. And here, the next slide is an illustration of well casing. Wells are sort of shaped like a telescope, and those layers on the side are steel pipe. And there have been 2 incidents in Pennsylvania where, due to improper formulation of cement and casing design, shallow gas has migrated into local water supplies. And this is a real concern. So what we tried to do in the Manhattan study, and what we're currently doing in an update of that, is looking at we looked at over 3,500 environmental violations reported by the Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection. And we looked carefully at what happened, and this reported on page 37 is our latest finding, where we find that there are 25 incidents involved major impacts, and these are spills over 100 gallons. Obviously, blowouts and venting and gas migration events are major events. And we took a closer look at actually what happened, what went wrong, how were the impacts mitigated. The vast majority of the environmental events were relatively minor, and that didn't really involve substantial impacts on the environment. Many of these were quite smaller spills, and this leads us to conclude that most of the events are minor. Here's a breakdown, sort of an event analysis you can see of all the environmental events that created pollution. 2.7% were minor events. That's the 25. And a further breakdown is pictured on the right, where we had 2 gas migration events and water contamination and major land spills. Okay, so there are environmental impacts, and I think the challenge for environmental economists and others is to quantify what these impacts are and evaluate how important they are to society. Pictured on page 39 is a tracking of wells drilled in the blue bars. You can see the ramp up in the number of wells drilled over this period. In the red bars are the environmental events per year, and the green line indicates the percentage of wells with pollution events. And you can see early on that there were over half the wells having some sort of pollution events, but that number has come down. So regulators have been, and the industry have been improving their environmental performance over this period of time. Okay, now, here I try to address this question, is it worth it? I mean, what are the environmental impacts? How can they be valued, and how do they compare with the economic benefits? The benefits we talked about are gains in real output, jobs, tax revenues. Also, there are benefits of using natural gas in downstream industries, and if you're displacing coal, you would be avoiding emissions from coal. The costs we include are air emissions from shale energy production, and this is through the life cycle of production and also during fracking. The costs associated with water pollution and forest disruption, and also noise, traffic externalities, and the like. So the key question is, what level of benefits are necessary to accept these risks? All right, so here's a summary on page 42. A version of this is in our Manhattan Institute study. Here, just to give you an illustration, I used a very conservative estimate for the economic benefits, where I just took the net present value of a well that would produce 3 BCF. That's on slide 8. It's about $1 million. And I used estimates from the environmental economics literature on the value of clean water, the damages associated with air emissions, and you can see that the subtotal for benefits is about $46,000. So I estimate the total benefits for a typical Marcellus well at about $1 million. And then on the right, you can see the environmental costs, the air impacts from upstream life cycle emissions, $2,800, the air impacts from diesel use during hydraulic fracturing. And here we calculated the amount of diesel that would be consumed during a typical frac job. We took the emissions that are associated with that and applied estimates of the damages per emission, such as for sulfur dioxide, particulates, and so on. We used estimates of the value of clean water and also estimates of the ecological value of forests to estimate what the damages are from forest disruption. The total costs we come in at about $14,000, so you can see that the benefits far exceed the costs on average. And so that's a key finding of our research. This next slide makes a few comments about environmental best practices. As I alluded to before, there's a considerable amount of learning that has occurred in the Pennsylvania Marcellus over the past 3 or 4 years by regulators and the industry. And as a result, some companies are following very conservative designs for casing and cement to avoid potential environmental problems. And there are tighter well safety and construction standards on preventing blowouts. And another key innovation is in the recycling of water and using pipelines to move fresh and produced water around well sites rather than relying on trucks to move this water. This not only reduces traffic and emissions during traffic, but also lowers the incidence of spills. And many companies, I'm not sure if all companies are doing this, but many are using tarpaulins over the entire well site and are very carefully tracking all liquids, essentially forming a closed system for drilling for waters and materials. Okay, so here we have, just conclude, actually I'm finishing quicker than I anticipated. We have this trend for higher oil, natural gas, and natural gas liquids production, and this is likely to continue as long as oil prices stay relatively high. And the implications of low-cost natural gas for the next 10 years could be quite significant for the industrial sector. You could see a lot of downstream industrial development based on this abundant low-cost natural gas. My reading of the environmental record is that the environmental impacts are, the severe environmental impacts are relatively infrequent. The effects are fairly localized but highly publicized. Another observation here, and this is perhaps unique to the East, and this will be a challenge, producing shale energy in close proximity to densely populated areas is feasible but somewhat problematic. So as we go forward here, we're going to see this tension persistent. Risk. I think risk assessment will be critical going forward, quantifying the risks. And in general, the economic benefits are measurable, appear to be significant, and the environmental risks appear manageable. Finally, just a comment about regulation. I think Pennsylvania has made considerable progress here, and allowing innovation to occur is really important. I think that the example of tarpaulins is a good one. It wasn't required by the regulators, but industry found it worthwhile to do. So these are the type of innovations that I think are important. So with that, I guess we can open it up for questions, and thank you for your time.
Great. Thanks a lot, Dr. Considine. We appreciate that. We got a lot of questions here, and we have about 12 minutes, and so we'll definitely not be able to get through all of them. We'll list all of them later and see if we can get some answers to some of them later on the website. But let me just go through a few of them. They came really pretty much throughout the presentation, so I'll kind of just follow through the presentation sections that you had and ask kind of a question maybe related to each of the areas. Going back to the beginning, when you were talking about sort of the process, there were a number of questions about natural gas liquids, and a couple people just wondering if you could talk a little more about natural gas liquids, what they are in chemical terms, and sort of what you mean by that concept.
Okay, natural gas liquids are mainly three products: ethane, propane, and butane. And I'm not a chemist or an engineer, so I hesitate to quote the chemical composition. But they're all, you can, methane, what I do know is methane is carbon and 4 hydrogen atoms, and propane, butane, and ethane have more carbon atoms, more hydrogen atoms. So they are used as chemical feedstocks. Propane, as you know, is used as a fuel for heating and cooking, and it's also a key feedstock along with ethane in ethylene production. And ethylene is a key feedstock for petrochemical production.
Great. And do these, is this, when you refer to wet gas, is that what you meant as natural gas liquids?
Yes. Yes. So for instance, in western Pennsylvania, eastern Ohio, there may be some wells that if you measure the heat value of the gases that are coming out of the well, it may be as high as 12 or 1,300 BTUs per cubic feet. Pipeline gas is about 1,000, a little over 1,000 BTU per 1,000 cubic feet, and the challenge then is to take out that additional 200 or 300 million BTU out of the gas stream, and that is done through pressure and temperature changes. The propane and the butane sort of precipitate out or sort of fall out during the processing. That's in the natural gas processing plant to produce pipeline quality gas. So the liquids come out with the gas in gaseous form out of the well, and then it's put through a processing facility where the methane is shipped to a pipeline. The ethane, butane, propane, and other products are separated out either as gas or liquid, generally liquids, and it's either put in a tank car on a rail or a truck or a pipeline and delivered to customers.
Great. So when you were going through the discussion of sort of the process for fracking, there were a lot of questions that came up, and they do relate to the end as well, to the environmental area. So I'll just ask them here.
Right.
But they were related to the frack fluids, the chemicals that are used during the fracking process. And a couple questions were sort of related to this. These chemicals aren't really, we don't hear a lot about them in the newspaper. We don't really know what they are. Is there anything you could tell us about what those chemicals are and what the industry is doing to help ensure that those chemicals are don't enter into the environment?
Well, I can speak to the last point, and there is, and this goes to the closed loop strategy that a lot of companies are following, where the fluids that do come up are captured, and the spent frack water is highly saline. It's a brine, and a few years ago, Pennsylvania allowed these materials to be disposed of in waterways. That is no longer the case, and those fluids now are captured and disposed of in EPA-certified deep injection wells or treated. Regarding the chemical composition, I think this whole area is somewhat in flux. There are some companies that are reporting what the chemical composition of this frack water is. For the most part, it's water and sand. It's like 98%, and it's that 2% that includes items like biocides that reduce the formation of bacteria, and detergents and lubricants. In prior years, petroleum products like diesel was used in this, but that practice I think has fallen by the wayside for the most part. That's about all I can comment on that issue.
Okay, and related to that was, and I think you got to this at the end, was there were a couple questions here about the water that's used in the fracking process. Number one is where are they getting the water, and number two is kind of how are they getting it there. And I think you mentioned it was more or less now coming, they're starting to pipe it in rather than truck it in.
Yeah, in some areas there, for instance, up in northeastern Pennsylvania, there are networks of irrigation pipe that's used to move fresh water to the well sites and then recycle the spent water for other frac jobs. So some companies have gone to more recycling of this water.
Okay, so
as to where the water comes from, I believe the water either comes from local water wells or surface water.
Okay. Okay, so that's great. I'm going to move on to some different kinds of questions. Those were we got a lot in the early stages on the process, and so that's just a flavor of those. Now, as we move down, there were a number of questions on the, and I think this relates to some of those studies that came out at Cornell on the greenhouse gas implications in the life cycle.
Right.
I wonder if you could just comment on that as to whether, in your view, really the life cycle effects of this, the natural gas through fracking is actually going to be less than, coal even, because I think some of those studies actually called that into question, didn't they?
Yes, and I have seen a critique of the Cornell study, and that Cornell study used data on Russian pipelines for leaks, and the key question is, there are two key questions associated with this whole issue of, are the life cycle emissions from natural gas production greater or less than coal? And the issue is, first, what exactly is the amount of methane leakage in the entire system from production to consumption? And I found the Cornell estimates to be very high and almost implausible, because methane is a valuable product and companies do not want that vented. The other key question is, this was brought out by another group at Cornell in the engineering college, and they found that the global warming potential factors used in the Cornell study were too high. If you use a standard metric that's used in the IPCC assessments, the results go the other way, where the gas system has a lower greenhouse gas emission impact than coal.
Okay, so probably there still is some debate on that, and there probably are going to be more studies coming out in the future, I would imagine, on that.
Yes, I'm aware that Carnegie Mellon, actually my estimates are based on Carnegie Mellon estimates of the life cycle impacts of greenhouse gas emissions in the gas sector. They're revisiting that study, so
okay.
It'll be interesting to see what their findings are.
Great, and then just really briefly, we have time for one or two more questions. So one of the questions was, are you aware of any longitudinal studies that have been performed to look at the human health impacts? I mean, has anyone sort of really looked at the health impacts potentially in some of these areas where fracking is occurring that you're aware of?
No, I am. There is a study done by Duke University. I think it was published in one of the journals, where they looked at water, chemical composition of water in and around frac areas, and they detected some signals. However, some have questioned that study because it doesn't provide an adequate control, as sort of a before and after. And this, I think, is a critical point in measuring what impact these operations have on local water supplies. And the issue is you need a benchmark. So right now, a lot of companies, and I think most companies now in Pennsylvania, are doing pre-drilling, and they're testing water around a proposed well site to establish a baseline. And what they're finding is a lot of the water already has elevated levels of methane and other chemicals from other sources like agricultural sources, natural methane seepage from shallow formations, and so on. So establishing that baseline, I think, is very important. But I am not aware of any longitudinal studies that have looked at health impacts.
Okay, and that's probably the Cornell study or the Duke study. I think that was that in Science or something like that.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah,
and
that was a number of people actually. Just to mention to you that a number of people did ask about that, the baseline question with respect to water quality, and basically you're affirming that there's not really a lot that's just now coming into standard practice. That there's
and one of the surprising things I found when I was doing the research for the Manhattan study, we interviewed people in the industry and the regulators, and many of the Pennsylvania water wells are not regulated. They're a lot of the wells are not properly cased, and that allows migration of gases. There's a lot of methane from decaying biological matter in the soils, and that gets into water. And also there's a lot of runoff from roads, salts, and other, petroleum products that come from vehicles, and that gets into the water. So it's a real confluence of different sources that are affecting water quality. So establishing that baseline is very important.
Great. So we're really sort of at the end of our time. We've gone over a little bit, but I did want to ask one final question. Mainly because it piqued my interest here, and hopefully could be answered briefly. But what's your prognosis on the dependency of the U.S. on foreign oil supply with respect to this expansion of shale gas and oil production?
Well, I think the trend is the U.S. is going to be reducing its dependence on foreign supplies of oil in particular, and I think there's every indication that this rate of increase in oil and liquids production is accelerating, and I don't think we are going to be energy independent, but if you look at North America as a whole, including Canada, North American liquids production may be reaching an all-time high within the next 5 years, which is very surprising. I think that's just an indication of $100 oil. It makes it much more profitable to look at and to develop these unconventional resources.
Great. Well, thanks a lot. I do want to apologize to our listeners out there. I do know there were some problems with audio, and we apologize for that. But as well, I want to apologize that we got a lot more questions than we were able to answer. And I'll say, even if we had a half hour, 45 minutes of time, we probably wouldn't have been able to answer those questions. There were a lot of them. But we'll have those listed up on the website at the end when we get the information up on the website, and we'll try to get answers to some of those questions, because there were just really a lot of good ones, and we appreciate people sending those in. And apologize that we didn't have the time to get to all of them. I want to again thank Dr. Considine for his outstanding presentation, and I would like to thank the Ohio State University, NOAA, and the National Sea Grant College Program for funding this webinar. We really do appreciate you taking the time to be with us today, Dr. Considine. I want to remind everybody that we have a survey, an And the URL is out there for this webinar. It's out there on the chat feature, so please take a few minutes to fill that out. We really do value your input, and that will really help us to develop future webinars and also develop our changingclimate.osu.edu website. The webinar series will continue. Next month with a webinar by USGS AIS expert Cindy Kolar speaking on the topic of climate change and invaders, sources of uncertainty in managing the Great Lakes region. That webinar will occur on Tuesday, March 20th. So again, thanks, Dr. Considine, and thanks to all the participants on this webinar. We hope you enjoyed it, and we appreciate your visiting with us.
You're welcome.
Yep.
Good day.
Thanks.